You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, 3 Men and a Mystery, DNA ID, and All Things Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is the Zodiac speaking. After a perceived 4-year absence in communications, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle declaring, "I am back with you." On April 24th, 1978, a hotly contested letter read, quote, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. I am back with you. Tell Herb Cain I am here. I have always been here. That city pig Tosky is good, but I am smarter and better. He will get tired, then leave me alone. I am waiting for a good movie about me. Who will play me? I am now in control of all things. Yours truly." This message was followed by the Zodiac crosshairs and the word guess, along with the familiar mocking of law enforcement and the SFPD, like a score with the 0 acronym. Understandably, law enforcement may have feared renewed activity from the Zodiac killer, but newspapers capitalized on the possible return of the Bay Area murderer, with a flurry of high-profile articles over the coming days. But things would soon turn sour when Tales of the City author Armistead Maupin came forward and poured huge doubt on the authenticity of the 1978 letter. He claimed that the handwriting on the letter looked suspiciously like Inspector Dave Tosky's, who had previously authored fake fan letters praising his character in the Tales of the City series. Armistead Maupin first befriended Dave Tosky in 1976 while he was writing Tales of the City. Wanting to stimulate greater readership, Armistead Maupin introduced a murder mystery element into his writing, resulting in him contacting San Francisco Chronicle reporter Bob Pop, who then introduced him to Inspector Dave Tosky. The police inspector would make a debut appearance in Tales of the City on September 10, 1976, with a character based on his attributes. Further episodes would follow under his real name as a friend and confidant to Armistead Maupin's fictitious detective Inspector Henry Tandy. In light of the revelations of Armistead Maupin, Inspector Dave Tosky was suspended from his position on July 10, 1978, and an investigation was begun almost immediately by Deputy Chief of Investigations Clement Diamasis. Dave Tosky would ultimately be demoted and placed on pawn shop detail. The proud investigator vehemently denied any involvement in writing the Question 1978 letter, and also the 1974 Exorcist letter, to which it was also suggested he may have authored. Contacted at home immediately after the transfer, Dave Tosky stated, "I wrote no Zodiac letter. I don't need another letter. It only brings me tons of extra work. It's a strain enough being in homicide." He went on to elaborate about Armistead Maupin. "They were really a silly mistake. He made me the hero of the story, and it was fun for me and my family. So I sent some notes, 3 or 4, saying how good it was that he put a real-life homicide inspector in the column. It was kind of like sending fan mail to myself. It was done in a harmless way. I didn't think anyone was going to be hurt by it. It was a vain thing to do, not an intelligent thing."
2 dubious Zodiac correspondences would soon follow on May the 2nd, 1978 and July the 19th, 1978, dubbed the Channel 9 letter and Scotch tape letter. The first was mailed on May the 2nd, 1978 from Anaheim in Orange County, just outside Los Angeles, and unearthed by Tom Voigt from ZodiacKiller.com. The letter was a threat to kill 5 high-profile people, which included Susan Atkins from the Manson family, and finished with a similar message to the April the 24th letter, stating, quote, "Hey, you actors, this is your lucky break. Remember, whoever plays me has his work cut out for him. See you in the news." The Channel 9 letter was mailed to KHJ TV Studios at 5615 Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles. However, the envelope was misaddressed and should have been mailed to 5515 Melrose Avenue, which was the correct address of Channel 9 KHJ TV, which sat right next to Paramount Studios located at 5555 Melrose Avenue. This area is just below the Hollywood Hills, an iconic sign. 5515 Melrose Avenue is only 6 miles from 150 Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate, aged 26, was brutally murdered by the Manson family on August the 9th, 1969. On the night of August the 8th, 1969, Manson directed Watson to take Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel to 150 Cielo Drive in Los Angeles and kill everyone there. The home had only recently been rented to actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. The author of the envelope wrote in reverse 1234567 AGCGTH, which means all good children go to heaven. This was placed on the envelope in the top left corner, taken from the Beatles' "You Never Give Me Your Money" lyrics, as well as a drawing of the Apple logo from their record label in the bottom left corner. The acronym AIC was also written in reverse on the return address portion of the envelope, probably signifying Anaheim in California, because this is where the envelope was postmarked. The second dubious correspondence was typewritten and mailed in Los Angeles to the San Francisco Chronicle, stating, "I am the Zodiac, and I am in control of all things. I am going to tell you a secret. I like friction tape. I like to have it around in case I need to truss someone up in a hurry. I have my real name on a small metallic tape. You see, while you have it in your possession, I want you to know it belongs to me, and you think I may have left it accidentally. I am athletic. It could be swim fins or a piece of scuba gear. But maybe you play chess with me. I have several cheap sets in closets all over. I have my name on the bottom of the lid with the Scotch tape. My tape is waiting for me all over California. Do you know me? I am the Zodiac, and I am in control." An extremely questionable letter that may have been directed towards recently demoted Dave Toschi. The request of, quote, "But maybe you play chess with me," could have been an attempt at ridicule, referring to Dave Toschi's unfortunate transfer to porn detail. Despite the claims of many Zodiac observers that these two letters are undeniably fraudulent Zodiac material, this cannot be proven. The best we can say is that these two communications have not met the threshold of authenticity, along with the April the 24th, 1978, "I am back with you" letter.
In the early morning hours of April 22, 1986, Coy Lenciaco, age 48, and Troy Falsaley, age 40, were traveling back from a Merced hospital to their home in Yuba City after visiting their son. That's when they were either ushered to the side of the road by a traveling motorist or chose to take a rest along Highway 99, close to the interchange of Interstate 5, just past downtown Sacramento. It's then that an unknown assailant approached the driver's side window of their four-door light blue 1983 Mercury and unloaded 15 small caliber rounds into the middle-aged couple, blowing out both front side windows in what can only be described as a merciless execution. The couple stood no chance of survival after suffering devastating injuries. Several newspaper reports detailed that a hitchhiker reported to police an accident along Highway 99. This hitchhiker never came forward in the aftermath of the murders to help police with their inquiries. In two newspaper reports, the hitchhiker is described as notifying an East Nicholas Highway patrol officer of what he described as an accident. The Appeal Democrat newspaper reported that, quote, Siacho and Saley, who lived at Dorman Avenue with 4 children and a grandchild, were sprayed with 15 rounds of small caliber gunfire as they sat in their car at Highway 99 and Interstate 5, where they had apparently stopped to rest. An unidentified hitchhiker was sought for questioning in connection with the killings. The hitchhiker had flagged down a California Highway Patrol officer in East Nicholas shortly after the killings to report an auto accident where the couple were found. This location is approximately 25 miles north of the crime scene. The Sacramento Bee ran an article stating, quote, 2 victims, Choi Falseli and Koilen Seako, were found dead in their car by a hitchhiker about 6:30 a.m. Sometime later, the hitchhiker reported what he had seen to authorities in Marysville. Marysville is 67 miles north of the crime scene and 18 miles further north from East Nicholas along California State Route 70. The Sacramento Bee ran a much more comprehensive article and wrote, police discovered the body sitting upright in the front seat of the Mercury after a hitchhiker told a Chico, California Highway Patrol officer he had witnessed a car wreck at the freeway interchange. Sergeant Bob Burns said, Chico is 90 miles north of the crime scene, a 90-minute car journey and 49 miles from Marysville. If these reports are correct, we have a mystery hitchhiker reporting an accident at 3 different locations, spanning 90 miles in a northerly direction. Exactly 2 weeks later, on May 6, 1986, a letter claiming to be from the Zodiac killer stated, quote, This is the Zodiac speaking. I am still out here, and crack-proof. I want you to know about my latest slaves that I have collected about 2 weeks ago up by Sacramento, California. I will give you clues to help you with the mystery. They were killed by a freeway. The Blue Meanies almost caught me. The body count is growing now, 100 plus all over the state of California and NA, possibly meaning Nevada. The letter may have been detailing the callous murders of Koilen Seako and Choi Falseli 2 weeks prior as they pulled over in their vehicle at the shoulder of a freeway. But was the author of the letter Zodiac? And was he murdering couples once again, in similar fashion to the attack at Blue Rock Springs on Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin on July 4th, 1969? Possibly having been galvanized and inspired to start attacking again by the recent release of the Zodiac book by Robert Graysmith. And is the reference to the Blue Meanies almost caught me an admission that the author was the hitchhiker, toying with the police over a traveling distance of 90 miles, and reporting the murders as an accident in East Nicholas, Marysville, and Chico in a daring game of cat and mouse? That is for you to decide.
On October the 28th, 1987, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle with the message, This, the Zodiac speaking. I am crack-proof. Tell Herb Cain that I am still here. I have always been here. Tell the Blue Pigs, if want me, I will be out driving around on Halloween in my death machine, looking for some kiddies to run over. Cars make nice weapons. The pigs can catch me if they can find me out there, just like in the movie, The Car. Tell the kiddies, watch before they cross the street on Halloween night. Tell Tosky my new plans. The following is taken from an article on my site which best explains my belief that the 1987 letter is genuine Zodiac material, thereby ruling out suspects such as Earl Van Best and Ross Sullivan, who died prior to the mailing of this communication. Every confirmed correspondence of the Zodiac killer to the San Francisco Chronicle was addressed in a particular way. The envelopes were either addressed S.F.Chronicle or sanfran.chronicle. That is 10 consecutive communications mailed throughout 1969 and 1970 to the San Francisco Chronicle, all of which used full stops in the name of the newspaper. If you include the Exorcist letter mailed to the Chronicle on January the 29th, 1974, that is 11 consecutive communications that followed this pattern. The following 3 communications to the San Francisco Chronicle, dubbed the SLA letter, Citizen Card, and Red Phantom letter, all broke with this pattern. They were addressed San Francisco Chronicle, SF Chronicle, and San Francisco Chronicle respectively. Not only did these three 1974 communications use an address style never used before by the Zodiac Killer, but suddenly the author had discovered the ability to spell, making not one single spelling error in any of these three communications, which included words such as symbionese, consternation, evidenced, glorification, deplorable, justifiable, sensibilities, psychological, and anonymously. In his letter to the San Francisco Examiner on July the 31st, 1969, he addressed the envelope to S.F. Examiner. In his letter to Melvin Belli, he addressed the envelope to Mr. Melvin M. Belli, using dots after abbreviations in the addressee. His letter to the Los Angeles Times again abbreviated the addressee to L.A. Times. The only exception from July the 31st, 1969 to January the 29th, 1974 was the envelope addressed to the Vallejo Times-Herald on July the 31st, 1969. It was addressed in full, using Vallejo Times-Herald rather than V.T. Herald or Vallejo Times, as he used in two of the July the 31st letters. The envelope to the Vallejo Times-Herald, confirmed as Zodiac, was the only communication out of 15 from July the 31st, 1969 to January the 29th, 1974 that did not abbreviate the addressee and did not include full stops. In fact, the letter to the Vallejo Times-Herald was the only time up to the Exodus letter that Zodiac ever used the full name of the newspaper he was addressing. This should give you extreme pause of thought when you consider the previously debunked October the 28th, 1987 Halloween letter. This communication not only carried the full address of Vallejo Times-Herald, just like the 1969 envelope, but both contained no full stops or commas. Both carried the phrase, "Please rush to editor," twice. Both contained exactly the same 13 words. Both used Calif for California, and both contained extremely excessive postage. The postal rate in 1969 was 6 cents, but the Zodiac placed 24 cents on his Vallejo Times-Herald envelope, an excess of 18 cents. The postal rate in 1987 was 22 cents, but the author affixed 44 cents worth of stamps, an excess of 22 cents. These were by far the most excessive postage used in any Zodiac or suspected Zodiac communications. When you consider the fact that a copycat would never have seen the 1969 Vallejo Times-Herald envelope in 1987, he did a remarkable job imitating the real killer in all of the above, notwithstanding the fact that the handwriting looked eerily similar. The author would have had handwriting available to him from published Zodiac letters and the dripping pen card envelope published in the November the 16th, 1970 San Francisco Chronicle. But how on earth does he use this to mimic the July the 31st envelope so perfectly in 1987? The author of the 1987 envelope could have designed it in a multitude of different ways, yet he just happened to choose the exact wording, devoid of punctuation, that perfectly mimicked an envelope in 1969 to which he should have had no knowledge of. Document examiners argued that this wasn't the Zodiac Killer, but a lazy copycat who mimicked the April the 24th, 1978 letter. Why would somebody attempting to hoax a Zodiac letter copy the only letter widely publicized to be fraudulent? The copycat in 1987 would have copied a hoax letter to convince us he was real. This makes no sense, bearing in mind a hoaxer had ample genuine Zodiac material available, including the Robert Graysmith book released 1 year earlier in 1986. We know of 3 communications mailed to the Vallejo Times-Herald by the September of 1990. The 1969, 1987 and Celebrity Cipher mailed on September the 25th, 1990. The July the 31st, 1969 envelope and September the 25th, 1990 postcard both carried the misspelled address of Herald, using the letter O instead of the letter A. It is my belief that the 1987 envelope carries the exact same error in spelling.
In August of 1990, Pam Huckabee, sister of murder victim Darlene Ferrin, appeared on the Sally Jesse Raphael show alongside Robert Graysmith, who had released his book The Sleeping Lady earlier that year. Her appearance on the TV show was featured in a Vallejo Times-Herald news article shortly after. The article stated, quote, "A former Vallejo woman related to one of the Zodiac's victims told a national television audience Wednesday that she is being harassed with death threats from the serial killer. Huckabee does not have a listed telephone number in Antioch and couldn't be contacted after Wednesday's appearance. The killer is called the Zodiac because of his cryptic messages, loaded with astrological symbols, to the news media and police investigators. It's not surprising that with the news coverage focused on Pam Huckabee's appearance, that 1 month later, a cryptic message was mailed in the form of a postcard to the Vallejo Times-Herald, and it was dubbed the Celebrity Cipher. The message on the postcard, believed to be featuring Carmel Beach on its face, contained all the familiar ciphertext used by the Zodiac, with Herald misspelled using the letter O, just like the unreleased envelope to the Vallejo Times-Herald on July 31st, 1969. Approximately 2 months later, a greeting card was mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle from Eureka, California. Dubbed the Eureka card, or American Greetings card, the festive offering depicts a Christmas scene of a snowman, adorned with a Groucho Marx-style face, red bobble hat, and a green and white striped scarf, with a small rabbit facing the snowman. The card read, "From your secret pal. Can't guess who I am yet? We'll look inside and you'll find out." And when the card was opened, it revealed the words, "That I'm going to keep you guessing. Happy holidays anyway." This card, however, was misplaced and effectively undisclosed until March 3rd, 2007, when an editorial assistant, Daniel King of the San Francisco Chronicle, found it among some photo files 2 days after the release of the 2007 Zodiac movie by David Fincher. Inside the card, the author had placed 2 photocopied post office box keys, which were eventually traced to their owner, using the numbers etched onto them. This was discovered through the work of Tom Boyd and Associates from the ZodiacKiller.com message board. The keys were traced to a Chester Clark Klingel, who claimed ownership of the post office box keys back in the 1990s. Klingel's obituary read, quote, "Chet's first wife Yolanda passed away in a car accident. His second marriage was short, but his third to Blandina Sarkis added love, happiness, family, and great food to his life. He had many good years in Tam Valley, California, beginning a farming venture near Turlock, California. Chet and Blandina bought nut orchards and developed a successful walnut hulling and drying business. After Blandina passed away, the farming project lost appeal. Chet sold the farm and moved to Eureka, California, where he made new friends. The issue we face is that Blandina Starkis Klingel died on September 9th, 1993. So if Chester moved to Eureka subsequent to his wife's death, he moved there after September 9th, 1993, yet somehow owned keys to a post office box in Eureka in December of 1990. Although it's pretty obvious you don't have to live in a town to acquire a P.O. box there. If the obituary is incorrect and Chester Clark Klingel did live in Eureka in December of 1990, as claimed by some, this would mean he buried his wife 370 miles away in Turlock, California, necessitating a 740-mile round trip to place flowers on her grave, which seems a rather strange choice of burial location. The exact circumstances surrounding the movements of Chester Clark Klingel have yet to be ironed out, although there are unconfirmed reports that he may have had a timeshare in Eureka prior to 1990, or had family members living there.
Just over a decade later, Another questionable Zodiac greeting card was mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle on January the 10th, 2001. It was addressed to the editor and signed with the Zodiac pseudonym, reading, and corrected for errors, "Dear Sir, whoever you are, this is just disgusting to read what seems to be news that nobody really cares about but the relatives of innocent citizens murdered in our beloved San Francisco. It's always the pedestrians' fault, never those bastard Mooney drivers, the majority black or Asians. What happened to the white people drivers we once had? Are they all retired, on welfare, or at Laguna Honda? From now on, there will be a Mooney driver executed for every citizen murdered in the streets of San Francisco. You thought I was dead. No way." Thanks to Craigle, a contributor to both main Zodiac forums, it was discovered that this letter was a direct response to the San Francisco Examiner and San Francisco Chronicle newspapers, who both ran extensive articles on January the 3rd and January the 9th on the deaths of pedestrians struck by Mooney streetcars. The most interesting aspect surrounding this communication was that this was the only second known communication thought to have been mailed by the Zodiac Killer or an imposter to the San Francisco Chronicle using a festive greetings card. The first being the Eureka card mailed in the December of 1990. The 2001 envelope contained a unique address format never before used by any other Zodiac or potential Zodiac communications since July the 31st, 1969. The envelope carried the wording of 901 Mission Street and the numerical identification of 94103, exactly the same as the Eureka envelope 10 years earlier. Yet the 1990 Eureka card and envelope had not been released into the public domain until 2007. This means that the author in 2001 could not have mimicked the Eureka card envelope. The question remains, why would a hoaxer in 2001 adopt an envelope style never used by the Zodiac Killer before if he was attempting to mimic the Zodiac Killer? There was plenty of Zodiac material available in the newspapers, and in Robert Graysmith's 1986 book had the author of the 2001 card opted to choose this easy route of mimicry.
On March 8, 1990, a man wearing a ski mask shot Mario Roscoe in the back and left him for dead. 3 weeks later, he attacked German Montenegro, who also fortunately survived the attack. But on May 31st, 1990, the attacker claimed his first murder victim, when Joseph Proce was shot in the lower back and eventually died in the hospital 3 weeks later. A note was discovered near where he was found and bore a picture of the astrological signs of the first 3 victims, and a message that read, "Zodiac, time to die." Robert Graysmith rejected the notion that this killer was the same one that terrorized the Bay Area 2 decades earlier, making his feelings known on the Sally Jesse Raphael show in August 1990. It's rather curious timing that after the celebrity appearance of Robert Graysmith on the Sally Jesse Raphael show in August of 1990 alongside Pam Huckabee, that a potential Zodiac postcard would arrive on September 25th, 1990, titled The Celebrity Cipher, and including a coded message. Did the fresh limelight draw the Zodiac Killer back from the shadows? Luis Campos, born in Santiago in the Dominican Republic, was an inventor, poet, and cryptographer who created puzzles and ciphers for the United Features Syndicate of New York, beginning in 1983. He would create 6 celebrity ciphers a week featuring famous quotes from well-known people past and present. The characters in the cryptograms were deliberately spaced into separate words. The newspaper reader had to identify the person and quote from the coded text. This was the format used by the designer of the Celebrity Cipher postcard, who teased us with their name on the address side of the postcard and at the end of the message. The author of the cryptogram was suggesting his name was 13 characters in length, just like the My Name Is cipher mailed by the Zodiac Killer on April 20th, 1970.
With everything said, from my perspective, the 1987 letter is the last communication that can be strongly linked to the Zodiac Killer, by the comparison of the October the 28th, 1987 and July the 31st, 1969 Vallejo Times-Herald envelopes. Despite the fact we cannot prove that the Zodiac Killer was responsible for the murders of Coy Ien Sachau and Choi Fao Saley in Sacramento in 1986, we can use the 1987 letter to indicate that the 1986 letter was penned by the same hand. In the Los Angeles letter from March the 13th, 1971, the Zodiac wrote, "This is the Zodiac speaking. Like I have always said, I am crack-proof. If the blue meanies are ever going to catch me, they had better get off their fat asses and do something, because the longer they fiddle and fart around, the more slaves I will collect for my afterlife." In the 1986 letter, the Zodiac wrote, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am still out here and crack-proof. I want you to know about my latest slaves that I have collected about 2 weeks ago up by Sacramento, California." The author of the 1986 letter changed "I am crack-proof" from 1971 to "I am still out here and crack-proof" 15 years later. In other words, he seemingly plagiarized the words from the 1971 letter, which doesn't prove he is the Zodiac Killer. Many communications have been mailed to the newspapers between March the 13th, 1971 and May the 6th, 1986. I have noticed at least 13 communications claimed to have been mailed by the Zodiac Killer between these dates, yet not one of them used the term crack-proof. The first time this phraseology was used was in the October the 5th, 1970 pasted postcard, but it was written as one word, without separating crack and proof. This means that the author of the 1986 communication selected the words crack and proof for the first time since March the 13th, 1971, spanning 15 years. The author of the 1986 envelope also affixed a flag over capital US stamp. The 1986 letter was never released to the newspapers, yet in the following year, the author of the 1987 letter not only used a similar flag over capital US stamp, but again began his correspondence using the words crack and proof in the separated format. Consequently, we have 2 consecutive mailings using the word crack and proof. If the 1987 author was different to the 1986 author, then he got extremely lucky mimicking the stamp selection and the opening 2 sentences, including the words crack and proof. You will also notice that the author of both communications managed to prominently black out 2 words on each occasion. But crucially, when you compare both letters, you will notice that all 4 words prominently blacked out over both letters all began with the letter T. Probably just another coincidence. What is certain is that the 4 prominently blacked out words in the 1986 and 1987 communications were all followed by a word beginning with T. Those 4 words were they, the, tell, and Toski. Additionally, the Los Angeles letter of March the 13th, 1971 stated, "If the blue meanies are ever going to catch me, they had better get off their fat asses and do something." The 1986 letter author would mimic this narrative by stating, "The blue meanies almost caught me." But if the 1987 letter writer, the following year, was not the author of the 1986 letter, he was again extremely fortunate to use the wording similar to that contained in the 1986 letter, such as, quote, "Tell the blue pigs, if want me, I will be out driving around on Halloween in my death machine, looking for some kiddies to run over. The pigs can catch me if they find me out there." After 15 years, two known consecutive communications with so many similarities should prove beyond any reasonable doubt that one person was the author of both. Any suspects who have died prior to the mailing of the 1986 and 1987 letters, in my opinion, should be ruled out entirely.
Murders, rapes, assaults, and every other heinous act people commit. How are these crimes solved? And why do people commit these evil acts? I'm Jared Bradley, the host of the podcast All Things Crime. And together with experts in every step of the investigative process, we explore how crime is solved. We launch new episodes every week. Subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss an episode of All Things Crime.
Sadly, the San Francisco Chronicle published an article on November the 16th, 1970, featuring the envelope to the 340 cipher. This is the exact style chosen by the author of the 1978 letter, thereby making it more difficult to distinguish whether the 1978 envelope and therefore letter was a genuine Zodiac correspondence. I find it unlikely that Dave Toschi hoaxed the 1978 letter because by choosing to mimic the only widely released envelope of the dripping pen card, the author is laying himself open to being accused of mimicry, especially when David Toschi had access to many of the Zodiac envelopes, any number of which he could have copied to make the 1978 letter appear more genuine. In a poll on my site, 73 of 126 voted the 1978 letter genuine. On your website, you have omitted the 1978 letter from confirmed Zodiac letters. So what are your personal thoughts on this letter and the notion David Toschi forged this communication?
I think as far as being officially confirmed by the investigators of the Zodiac case by the police, it's not listed as a confirmed Zodiac correspondence. I think we should point that out for listeners. When I look at that letter, just again, I'm not a professional. I'm not a trained documents examiner, but a lot of things just jump out to me in that letter that it just does not look like Zodiac's old letters. A lot of things are different to me. And again, a little bit of reference, it was tied to Dave Toschi, and the accusation was Dave Toschi wanted to drum up publicity for the case, so he wrote this letter hoping it would get more attention and he could work on the case more. And the person that suspected him of forging this suspected him in the first place because Dave had written a letter to him about basically a cartoon that he was running in the newspaper, and which was based on Dave Toschi. And they stopped running it, and Dave and his family thought it would be fun to keep seeing the cartoon based on him, so they wrote an anonymous letter basically saying that they'd like to see the character brought back in the cartoon. And based on that, they thought, okay, if he was willing to do that, to write an anonymous letter, see this cartoon character come back based on him, he could do the same thing about this 1978 letter. And the reporter thought this letter had the same tone as the letter that Dave Toschi had supposedly written for this cartoon. So the way that this was brought up as being forged by Dave Toschi specifically, is questionable in my book. But when you look at the document specifically, I don't know who wrote it, if it was Dave Toschi or someone else. To me, I just don't see much here that looks like Zodiac, in my opinion. And again, different examiners have questioned it. I know Sherwood Morrill, who did most of the Zodiac letters, was of the opinion this was not Zodiac. And there were others that thought that it was. But ultimately, it seems like they settled on it not being a legitimate Zodiac letter. So I'm still in the camp that the last official confirmed letter from Zodiac was sent in 1974. Now, again, that being said, I do see some similarities in this letter, but I see a lot of things that just don't match, in my opinion. So there's nothing there that makes me think this is definitely a Zodiac letter.
David Toschi admitted to writing fan letters to the Tales of the City series, praising his character in the Tales of the City series. But he started in the Tales of the City series in 1976 So one has to question why Armistead Maupin, who was the author of Tales of the City series, decided to wait such a long time to bring up these fan letters mailed by David Toschi, especially when you consider that the book release for the Tales of the City series came out just before he made this declaration. And I was wondering whether Armistead Maupin had done this action to drum up publicity for his book.
Well, that's a good point. So what better way to get publicity for your work than, say, somebody else forged a Zodiac letter to get publicity for their work, and then all of a sudden it's in the news cycle. And again, I'm not accusing anyone. I don't know who wrote this letter. Just in my opinion, I just don't see it being Zodiac. But again, there's enough similarities to make one wonder, and there's obviously the experts sort of argued on it. So I guess it's left over to each person that views its opinion on whether they think it's a legitimate Zodiac letter or not.
We're all probably of the belief that Zodiac had a fascination with the movies and the theatre. And so it was unusual that he would say, I'm waiting for a good movie about me, considering in the February of 1978, the film The Toolbox Murders was released, which featured a killer targeting women in an Los Angeles apartment where he killed them with different methods, different types of weapons, bearing in mind the Halloween card where he bragged about by knife, by gun, by fire, by rope. I found this a curious link, and whether he was inspired by this movie to write about I'm waiting for a good movie about me just a couple of months later.
Yeah, you have to wonder if that was his inspiration. If this was a legitimate Zodiac letter, it seems like Zodiac was reactive to stuff. Certain things seem to set him off to write letters, whether it was the Exorcist movie being out or SLA stuff coming in that caused that SLA letter to come out in 1974. Again, there's some debate on whether that was really Zodiac or not, but if they are legitimate Zodiac letters, it seems like he references certain things that are going on in the news to get attention that he knows that people are talking about. So movies coming out that seem to catch his attention, I could definitely see him being inspired by that and wanting to take advantage. Then again, I don't know how many people saw the Toolbox Murders when it came out that year. It seems like it was probably a low budget slasher movie, but if he saw that might be something that would inspire him, specifically something that would inspire him to write to the LA Times or to Los Angeles rather than his normal stomping grounds in San Francisco. So maybe news that was going on there inspired him.
Now let's move on 3 years to March the 8th, 1981. When a letter was mailed to WX1A TV 11 Alive station on 1611 West Peachtree Street in Atlanta. It carried the message, and I'll quote this, "Hello, it's me. Haven't you people figured out who is killing these little people yet? I will give you a hint. I used to be in San Francisco. I used to stalk women, but I like to kill children now. At all my victims' bodies, I have left certain clues, but I guess it's too much for you rebels to handle. So I guess I'll have to tell you. I'll kill children because they are so easy to pick off. By the way, if you still have letters from the other murders, I am not writing in the same handwriting." And it was signed Zodiac with his crosshairs. What validity do you place on this letter?
I have to say, in my opinion, this is probably not a real Zodiac letter. Again, I'm not a documents examiner. I'm not a handwriting examiner. It looks like the person that wrote this letter tried to alter their handwriting, where Zodiac, I don't think, did. I think his long letters, especially like something like the little list letter, you can't alter your writing for 6 pages worth of writing. I think that's their real handwriting, where here it seems as if the person did take their time to alter their handwriting. We'd also have to believe that Zodiac had moved to Atlanta now, or was visiting there at the very least to mail this letter. So I think it opens up the possibility that this is a forger for some reason, wanted to reference Zodiac. But again, the Atlanta child murders were making big news. So we know Zodiac is the type of person that would see that in the news and say, I'm going to get some attention and I'm going to reference the Atlanta child murders to do it. Now again, what's interesting is that while I look at this and I don't see anything that looks like Zodiac's writing, the FBI examiners make notes in their examination that while there is distortion, that Zodiac cannot be ruled out as the author of this letter. And I find that interesting. Again, the professionals, not me, but they saw enough in this letter to say we can't rule Zodiac out. So whatever they were looking at seemed to think that it was a possibility that Zodiac did mail this letter.
Yeah, they may have considered it because of the other two correspondences that came alongside this letter. Only 6 days before this letter came, on March the 2nd, 1981, a business reply envelope postmarked Cleveland bore the press-printed address of the Danbury Mint, which is in Norwalk, Connecticut. It contained a handwritten note stating, "Please stop forced busing, or I will kill 3 more black kids in Atlanta in March." Another letter, heavily featured on your website, was detailed in an FBI file in which an anonymous person contacted the Washington Post and requested an advertisement be placed with the message, "Daniel, please call home." The Washington Post agreed to place the ad on March the 19th, 1981. It is extremely likely these letters in close proximity to one another could be the same author or Zodiac. I believe this last communication should have read, "Darren, please call home," because Darren Glass was a 10-year-old boy believed to have been the victim of Wayne Williams, the Atlanta child murderer. He was the only child listed as still missing. Now, a few months earlier, on November the 29th, 1980, the Indianapolis Star newspaper ran an article with the headline, "Child may have tried to call home," and may have been the part inspiration for this anonymous letter. What is your take on these further letters, and do they bolster the case for the Zodiac killer playing sinister games in Atlanta?
Again, my uneducated documents examiner opinion, the writing doesn't look to me to match Zodiac's in the busing letter. To me, it actually doesn't look a lot like the Atlanta letter where he signed Zodiac. They look like two completely different authors. So I don't know if they're connected by the same author or not. But again, that does seem like Zodiac's MO to want to capitalize on some attention. So if we have this missing child, again, switching from the Daniel or the Darren, if there's some kind of typo there or whatever, it might be something he would do, send a taunting, cold letter seeming to reference that boy, that child, and to want to get attention based on him being missing. And that's something that is sort of what we know about Zodiac. He did do things like that. So that MO sort of does fit, with Zodiac wanting to capitalize on that attention.
And you would expect somebody who is genuine, requesting to search for the missing boy to call home, you would expect the person to get the boy's name correct if he was a genuine, authentic, concerned citizen.
Yeah, that's correct. Again, since we're going by these FBI reports and memos, it could be a typo. Because correct me if I'm wrong, there's no images of that letter on the internet, are there?
I'm not sure. I think there is.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember seeing that one. And
I'd have to look at your site again to see if it's actually there. But that was certainly what was written on the communication.
And if there isn't, if I saw the letter with my own eyes, and again, it's been so long since I looked through some of the stuff, but if I saw the letter with my own eyes and I could see the name on there that was written, then we could confirm one way or the other. If it's Daniel or Darren, whatever name, we could tell for sure. But again, if we don't see that image anywhere and we're taking the FBI's word for it, it's possible that the memo just has an incorrect name written in there. There's been typos in some of these reports before. They may have just put the wrong name in there. But there's another possibility that maybe, while it could be connected to that missing child, maybe it's a totally different Daniel. Maybe there is another kid out there, another person named Daniel that the writer was referencing.
Moving on another 7 years, the 1988 New Canaan letters were postmarked Stamford, Connecticut. From my standpoint, the 1988 New Canaan letters were likely mailed by an extremely young and childish author, clearly not the Zodiac killer. I believe you were contacted by somebody who revealed that the author was indeed a young man.
I was. I'm going back so long, I don't remember the full gist of that, but from what I do remember, they were pretty steadfast that the person was identified and they know who it was, and he turned out to be a younger person. So I never really spent too much time chasing that rabbit hole because it seemed like the person that contacted me, their information seemed pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, these letters contain cryptograms within them. And it was found within these decoded cryptograms that two names were revealed in the deciphered code of the letters. They were Mrs. Taylor and Shauna. I did a bit of digging, and in the 1989 New Canaan yearbook, you will find the names of Krista Taylor and Shauna McCarthy. Strangely, New Canaan High School is only 3 miles from the Danbury Mint, which was on the press-printed envelope that contained the message threatening to kill 3 black kids.
And that's interesting, and that leads me to believe that whether that's a Zodiac letter or a forger, maybe that person is responsible for both of those letters from that area.
Now, we'll go back a year to discuss the 1987 letter. Now, I believe I have discovered the inspiration behind the 1987 letter. The last communication I can confidently, just from my personal opinion, credit to the Zodiac killer. In the letter, the author states, "Cars make nice weapons," and mentions the movie The Car from a decade ago. Often, the Zodiac is inspired by newspaper articles, so I went searching for articles where kids had possibly been murdered by a car, because the whole emphasis of the letter was geared towards kids on Halloween. 1 month earlier, on September the 12th, 1987, Jose Bugarin and Rodolfo Alvaro ran over and killed 3 children and injured 1 as they played on the front lawn of a residence in San Jose. They were arrested on murder charges. I am guessing this was the inspiration for the 1987 letter. However, you are not as convinced as me regarding this communication.
Again, letters in general after 1974, since they're not on the official list of confirmed Zodiac letters, I'm always questioning them as not readily, to accept that they're Zodiac letters. But I'm open to it. Now, this is an instance where this letter, when I look at the envelope for it, it seems to me to look.
This is the point I was making in the intro, and I remember I did a forum post that the exact same 13 words with the same punctuation, spelling probably Herald with an O again, were all present on the unreleased Vallejo Times 1969 envelope.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is a hoaxer sits down in 1987 and he just happens to, he was described as a lazy hoaxer copying the 78 letter. Well, how did he copy the 69 envelope perfectly with the exact wording, with the same misspellings, with the same punctuation, if he's just a lazy hoaxer? This is why I believe it's genuine.
Gotcha.
That's what makes me believe it's almost impossible for a hoaxer to have got all this correct. This is why I'm claiming this is genuine. This is the last one I can confidently say is the Zodiac killer.
Well, let me say this. It seems to me like the timing of these 1986 to 1987 letters, coincidentally or not, lines up with Robert Graysmith's book being published. So again, here we have someone like Zodiac, a book finally being written about him and being published. He might have been inspired to write some letters in 1986 to 1987. I know the image on your site looks pretty close to the earlier Zodiac letters, so that's interesting. There's some traits in there. But I also wonder, part of me asks, is there somehow some publicity stunt behind wanting to get sales for a new book that's out about Zodiac? The timing just seems interesting, whether it's to get publicity by an author, not accusing Robert Graysmith of anything, but what better way to get some publicity for a new book than have a Zodiac letter come out in 86 or 87? But then again, Zodiac would be inspired too to get some publicity because the book's out. So the timing's definitely interesting, whether it's a legitimate Zodiac letter or not.
And the 1986 may have got his juices running again, because when you consider that the murders of Sir Chow and Sei Lee were featured in the Sacramento newspaper and some other fringe newspapers, it wasn't featured heavily in the Chronicle or the Examiner. So considering this was May and Graysmith's book came out in January, it's surprising how he managed to stumble across a crime that so mimicked his Blue Rock Springs attack, where he went up to the driver's side window in this instance and fired off 15 small caliber bullets into both victims as they were seated in the front of the vehicle. And also, we could conclude, for people who believe that Kathleen Johns was a Zodiac crime, he could easily have pulled them to the side of this freeway on a ruse, exactly like he did in 1970.
Yeah, it definitely opens up some possibilities for it to be Zodiac activity. Or maybe Zodiac read about it in the paper and said, hey, that sounds like something I would have done when I was doing my thing. Let me write a letter and see if I can get some credit for it. Yeah, it definitely is interesting that if there's a forger here or a hoaxer, that they're reaching all the way back to early Zodiac letters to use for some material here. Then again, I wonder if the same forger, you mentioned similarities in a couple of these question letters, black areas marked out before a name of someone with a T. That's a similarity that you see in both these letters. So I think it's pretty clear that these could be from one author, and the question just is that author a Zodiac or some kind of hoaxer?
Right, let's move on to one of your favourite subjects at the moment, and that is the photocopied keys, which were in the Eureka card, were identified as belonging to Chester Clark Klingle. Chester married his third wife, Blandina Sarkis, but she died on September the 9th, 1993. What is the likelihood Chester was living in Eureka at the time of her death, but chose to bury her in Turlock, California, a 740-mile round trip to visit her grave? His obituary claims he was still living in Turlock in September 1993.
Well, I admittedly don't know a whole lot about Chester himself. The little bit I've heard and read, he had family connections at the very least in Eureka during 1990. I did some property searches for things that he purchased property-wise, and they all happened after 1990. So I haven't officially seen any indication that Chester was living in Eureka, in that town, during 1990 when that card was mailed. But it's interesting that police thought enough of this letter to track down who the owner was and to track down Chester Klingle. So they had some interest in it, which is pretty telling. If they thought it was a hoax, it seems like they went through some trouble trying to track him down and find out and investigate him to make sure it wasn't real. So maybe they saw something there that made them think it was a legitimate letter. Now, again, just my opinion, I'm not, a documents examiner. I like to keep pointing that out to listeners. But a lot of just the overall writing, especially in maybe the envelope, seems a little bit more, when I see it, it looks a little bit more Zodiac-like than a lot of the 86 to 87 writing itself. I know you pointed out certain habits in those 86 to 87 letters that resemble Zodiac's habits, but the writing itself to me looks a little bit more natural on the envelope of that 1990 correspondence. Now, obviously there's not much handwriting inside the envelope, so I'm just going by the envelope there. But I think we should point out for listeners too, the interesting thing about Eureka is it's a 200 plus mile trip from the San Francisco Bay Area. So of all places for a Zodiac letter to come, why that area? It's sort of unique. It's not something where we had any Zodiac activity in the past. But again, the person, we should point this out too, the person in the Eureka card, the author of that, whether it's Zodiac or someone else, didn't mention anything about Zodiac. So we really don't know how it came to be in the possession of the San Francisco Chronicle, why they thought it was a legitimate Zodiac letter, unless they just had someone looking at every suspicious letter that came through and they thought the writing looked similar or something, the way I do on the envelope, because the person just doesn't reference Zodiac at all in the letter. So if I'm a hoaxer, or from the real Zodiac letter, and I want people to know it's me or think I'm the Zodiac, I would mention Zodiac someplace in there. And this person doesn't. So while it's mysterious, while the card inside doesn't have any writing on it, but it seems to be sending a message, while there's a picture of keys, it seems to have done its job of making people think it was definitely Zodiac, whether it was or not.
Somebody on your forum also pointed out that it looked extremely similar to writing by Theodore Kaczynski.
Yeah, and while I don't buy Zodiac, what was Ted Kaczynski in any way, shape, or form, I think they're 100% different as far as their MOs. And I think experts would agree with that. But one thing about Ted Kaczynski is his writing is somewhat similar to Zodiac's. But again, why that town? There's no threat there. There's nothing there. Nothing happened that we know. There's no cases in Eureka. And why that town 200 miles away from Zodiac's stomping grounds? And if you want people to think you're Zodiac or know you're Zodiac, why are you not mentioning Zodiac anywhere in that correspondence? So I'm sort of up in the air on it.
Well, obviously, there's limited handwriting on the Eureka card, so it's difficult to authenticate it. What I tend to do is look for a running theme. If we go back to, say, the dripping pen card, and I'm going to talk about 6 cards here. If we go back to the dripping pen card where you said you wouldn't get the bad news for a while yet, it was suggested that this may have been Daniel Williams, and he was hinting that he was still targeting Daniel Williams. We move on to the Halloween card, and I suggested that the 14 incorporated in his victim total may have been suggesting 4 teenagers in his victim total, i.e. Snoozy, Furlong, Faraday and Jensen. And then we move on to the Pines card. If you place, obviously, the Sierra Club over the Sierra Club of Clare Tappan Lodge, the circle falls over the Donner Memorial State Park. And then you move on to the Monticello card, where he points out Monticello, which was the neighborhood in San Jose and the burial site of Kathy Snoozy, thereby giving a clue to the name of Kathy Biek, who was the victim in the Monticello card. Then we move on to the Celebrity Cipher in September 1990, where he teases us probably with his name in cryptogram form. And then we get to the Eureka card, and Nin suggested this on Tom Voigt's site, where Chester Carlson was the inventor of the photocopying process, and hence why the keys were photocopied to give us a clue to the name Chester. Therefore, we're having a running theme of 6 cards where possibly the Zodiac Killer is tempting us with clues to a name in every single one of them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think unless the case is solved one day and we can go back and sort of connect the dots, and I don't know that we'll ever know who's accurate and how many of these letters can be proven to be from the real Zodiac, but it will be interesting when that day comes. Hopefully that day comes. We'll go back and sort of reverse engineer everything that we've talked about over the years and be able to tell what was real and what was not real and why he did ultimately send things when he did.
The 2001 greetings card was mailed before the release of the Eureka card in 2007. What are your thoughts on its relationship to the Eureka card?
Yeah, I look at this as interesting, obviously, that it appears to match some other Zodiac correspondences. Now, this January 10th, 2001 card, for example, I'm looking at, and again, pointing out, I'm not an expert, but I see a lot of discrepancies from Zodiac's known writing. You know, the uppercase F is one thing, and there's just other things that don't appear to me to match Zodiac. Now, again, it's decades later after his main correspondences, so could his handwriting change a little bit? Sure. But I see some discrepancies here. And while this writing matches other question Zodiac documents that aren't confirmed, to me it opens up the possibility that maybe these correspondences that are unconfirmed Zodiac correspondences are created by the same hoaxer. I think it opens up that possibility. So seeing one unconfirmed Zodiac letter that matches another unconfirmed Zodiac letter to me backs up that there may be one person doing it. Now, could they have drawn on some legitimate Zodiac letters? I think that's a possibility, but I think there's also a possibility here that this is from this series of correspondences, maybe from one hoaxer.
Well, Robert Graysmith's book was released in 1986, and you had all the newspaper articles. So wouldn't you expect a hoaxer to have ample material for him to easily copy if he was prepared to make the effort to create a letter in the name of Zodiac in the first place? Therefore, if we have handwriting dissimilar to the Zodiac, it's maybe an argument that it's more likely to be the Zodiac killer.
And you're right about that, because you could make it, if you really wanted to make a hoax, you could really match it up and make it look as close as possible. So the fact there are differences is interesting. At the same time, creating a hoax letter that looks just like Zodiac's would take a lot of time and be painstaking work to perfect it. So that could be the reason why. And that's the only question, that's the only issue with looking at some of these questioned or unconfirmed documents and trying to connect them to Zodiac. They're essentially rabbit holes to go down, and with no confirmation that they're really from him, we don't really know or truly know that we're looking at Zodiac correspondences. So in the end, I go back to, unless the case is solved and we connect the dots and reverse engineer some of these things, we might be able to sort out which ones are real and which ones are not.
Do you think there's a tendency for people to disbelieve the later letters simply because of the time they were mailed? If the 1986, 1987 and say Eureka card were mailed in 1969, people would be prepared to take them as more genuine.
Again, going back to the official confirmed Zodiac correspondences, if we look at everything that's officially confirmed to be from Zodiac, it ends in 1974. So I think any time after that, you're going to have people questioning some of the letters that come after that. But again, knowing what we know about Zodiac, things like a new book, a new movie, newspaper articles mentioning Zodiac, all of those kinds of things might inspire Zodiac to write again. So I don't think we can totally discount any of these newer correspondences because he may have been inspired to write. So I think we have to leave that opportunity open. But if we go by the official documented Zodiac letters, they end in 1974. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. New episodes of Zodiac Speaking will air every other Saturday. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac. Or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site, zodiacciphers.com, or by going to Mike's site at zodiackillersite.com.
We'd like to take a moment to thank all the people that have reached out to Rich and I to say congrats on starting Zodiac Speaking, or to compliment us on the podcast or the material we've covered so far. We really appreciate all the support, and if you'd like to help us grow, please take a minute to rate us and leave us a review wherever you listen to the show. You can also recommend Zodiac Speaking to your friends. We'll be doing a special Q&A episode coming up, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask, feel free to reach out to us on social media. Or you can email us questions directly at zodiacspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. As we wrap up this episode, Rich and I would like to invite you to listen to a preview of a podcast we think you'll enjoy. It's called Crime Divers. Be sure to give it a listen.
Are you fascinated by true crime like us?
If so, check out our podcast, Crime Divers, hosted by me, Jill.
And me, Laura.
Look out for new episodes every Tuesday when we discuss true crime from around the world.
So what are you waiting for? Come join us as we dive in.